listener production.
Hey, Tara Cassidy with you and welcome to The Briefing. Walking out of a supermarket these days is hitting the hip pocket harder than ever. But there's one crowd pleaser that's hit record high prices and it's showing no signs of stopping.
In December last year, a tonne of cocoa cost almost $13,000, and that was more than 3 times the price it was in 2023. So that extra cost is passed down the line and you pay more at the shop.
That deep dive into why we're paying more for chocolate and the little-known deal that's leaving Aussies behind is coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Chris Spyrou. It's Friday the 6th of June.
Hey Tara, and to you listening. The roommates of missing teenager Pheobe Bishop have been charged with murder after the 17-year-old went missing from Queensland's Wide Bay 3 weeks ago. 34-year-old James Wood and 33-year-old Tanika Bromley have been arrested and charged with murder and interfering with a corpse. The pair told police they dropped Phoebe to the Bundaberg airport, where she was meant to board a flight to Western Australia to see her boyfriend, but CCTV footage shows she never arrived.
And before the arrests, new evidence was provided to police by some of Phoebe's friends, including screenshots of her Facebook account appearing as active multiple times yesterday. Phoebe's mother, Kylie Bishop, posted to social media saying she's been alerted to the charges and her world's been shattered into the most horrific place. She says, "I need my baby home to put her to rest. I'm absolutely begging anyone that knows anything to come forward."
Yeah, and we've heard a lot from Phoebe's mum throughout the last few weeks, and obviously hearing that and reading that yesterday is devastating. Just generally, these charges, obviously we have to wait. They have to be tested in court. At this stage, these housemates have to be treated as innocent until proven guilty. But if they are found guilty, it's worth noting in Queensland, there's no body, no parole laws. And if someone is found guilty of murder in the state, they are handed a mandatory life sentence. However, after 20 years, they can be eligible for parole.
But if a body isn't found or those convicted haven't actually helped authorities find it to try and give closure to the families, that parole option is off the table and they will stay in prison for life.
To New Zealand, where 3 Maori MPs have copped record-breaking suspensions for performing a haka in Parliament last year. 22-year-old opposition MP Hana Rafidi Maipi-Clark, who started the traditional dance, was suspended for 7 days, while her party's co-leaders Rawiri Waititi and Debbie Nari Parker were banned for 21 days, smashing the previous record of just 3.
The trio were protesting a controversial bill that sought to redefine New Zealand's founding treaty with its Indigenous people, a bill that drew nationwide outrage and saw more than 40,000 people protest outside Parliament in November. The bill has since been scrapped, but a parliamentary committee proposed suspending the MPs last month, ruling that the haka could have intimidated other lawmakers.
While debated and passed in Parliament yesterday, the centre-right government was accused of attacking Maori rights and attempting to silence their voices, while it maintains the MPs overstepped the mark, and while they have a right to protest, they didn't follow the rules of Parliament.
Aussie women using weight loss drugs like Ozempic and Mounjaro are being warned to use physical barriers of contraceptive protection. It comes after a UK watchdog received at least 40 reports of women falling pregnant who were using regular birth control pills as well as the weight loss medication. The UK's Medicine and Health Regulator issued the warning yesterday, saying some of the drugs may reduce the effectiveness of oral contraceptive pills and that women taking them should use barrier contraceptives like condoms.
It says it received reports of 26 pregnancies relating to Mounjaro and others relating to Ozempic and Saxenda. While the watchdog says it wasn't necessary for the women to say if the pregnancy was unintentional, multiple had reported to them anyway, saying the pregnancies hadn't been planned. Now, some experts have come out to explain why this might be the case, and they've said it's got to do with how these weight loss drugs can affect the absorption of the pill. So where these medications cause side effects like vomiting or diarrhea, those are all things that can reduce the pill's effectiveness.
There's been some major changes for Aussie pet owners across the country. Next week, an update to the Family Law Act will come into effect, which will change the way pets are handled in family law disputes. Pets will now be treated as more than just property in these settlements. So things like whose name the pets are under, who feeds it, who takes them to the vet, pays for medical expenses, etc., and who the animal would be better off with will be considered.
Yeah, and currently in some arrangements, pets are being passed between two homes, and these will now be analysed more closely to see what's in the best interest of the parties, any children, and of course the animal. The amendments also include changes relating to victim survivors of family violence to ensure both owners and pets are in safe environments. Now, this has happened at the same time as another major change in the pet sphere, hasn't it, Tara?
Yeah, that's right, because Australia's third biggest pet store, Petto, terrible name, has announced it's banning the sale of live animals across all 58 of its stores, and it's urging other retailers to follow suit, saying the sale of animals in shops raises ethical and welfare concerns.
Yeah, and while the chain expect it will impact revenue in the short term, it anticipates the change will boost its annual earnings to $250 million in the next 3 years. Now, this got me thinking about window shopping and pet window shopping and how, like, every Westfield I went to as a kid, there was a dog in the window that I loved looking at, but my parents would constantly rip me away from. I mean, at the time it was cute, but as an adult now, I'm kind of looking at it going, oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
very
100%.
problematic.
Now that you realise what's going on, no, I totally support this. I think that's fantastic news.
Well, that's a lovely turn by Riley McGree. The cutback, they're queuing up here. It's Bayic! Unbelievable! They've done it! In the very last minute of the game!
And the Socceroos have pretty much qualified for the 2026 World Cup after pulling off a last-minute win against Japan in Perth last night. More than 57,000 fans watched on as defender Aziz Bayic broke the deadlock in the 89th minute of what was otherwise a pretty snoozy game, wasn't it, Chris?
Oh, it was quite a snoozy game, but what a goal it was. Truly one for the history books, especially for Bayic. It was his first goal in the green and gold in 13 years. And also, last night marked the first time we've beaten Japan in 16 years. And we ended their 21-match unbeaten run in the qualifiers thus far, which is huge.
Now, we do have one more match in this round of qualifiers that's against Saudi Arabia on Wednesday, but unless we lose that game 8-0, we're through. So, look, I'm not telling you what to do, but maybe start looking at flights to the US, Canada and Mexico because our boys are heading to the World Cup.
They are.
Now, you stayed up and watched the game, but zoned out a little, I hear, Chris?
Yeah, I did, but not for, bad reasons. I was doing some very important journalism. Today, of course, is International Donut Day. Yeah,
I thought you were being serious here.
No, this is serious because there are multiple outlets offering free donuts to the Australian public.
I'd sell my soul for a donut.
This is huge public service journalism. If you head to Krispy Kremes today, ladies and gentlemen, you can nab yourself a free original glaze. Or if you head to Donut King, you can nab yourself a free hot cinnamon donut. So like I said, very important public interest journalism there, Tara. Look, that brings our headlines to a close for this week. But next up, we're sticking with all things sweet because we have got my deep dive looking into the world of chocolate and the secret deal that's costing you at the checkout. Stick around, that's coming up for you next. When was the last time you bought yourself a block of chocky? And when you got to the checkout, what price came up? Well, a block of Cadbury Dairy Milk is going for $8 at Coles and Woolies at the moment, and that price tag's been rising what feels like relentlessly over the past year. Now we're at a point where we're paying more than double than what we would have paid a decade ago. And before you say, well, that's just the world we live in, things are more expensive, there is one very interesting reason you've probably never heard before, along with some other factors that's driving all of this. And joining me to unpack it is independent journo and host of the Internet Reviewed on YouTube, Kirsten Drysdale. Kirsten, welcome to the briefing. Why are we paying $8 for a block of chocolate?
The very short answer is because there just are not enough cocoa beans to go around. You know, that's it. It's supply and demand. Fewer cocoa beans means the companies who want the beans to make the chocolate with have to pay more for them. And just to give you a sense of what they're paying, in December last year, a ton of cocoa cost almost $13,000, and that was more than 3 times the price it was in 2023. So that extra cost is passed down the line and you pay more at the shop.
How much blame can we place on our supermarkets? I know here down under we love to hang shit on Woolies and Coles. How much blame can we actually put on them when it comes to this?
I honestly don't think we can pin this one on the supermarkets. This is really not all that much in their control. These are huge global factors. Everyone around the world is feeling this price crunch on chocolate and cocoa. So I don't think this is a Coles and Woolies issue.
Now, there's a bunch of factors at play here. One of the ones that is most commonly reported is the role of climate change. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there has been some bad weather affecting the areas that cocoa beans are grown. They grow on trees. And one of the things to understand is there's quite a thin band where cocoa is grown around the world. It's something like 3/4 of the world's cocoa comes from areas 8 degrees north and south of the equator, right? So they've been affected by some bad weather events. There's also been some crop diseases and plant diseases affecting the trees. Also, a lot of the trees are getting really old, and older trees just don't produce as many cocoa beans. So that's part of it as well.
Well, speaking of those global factors, one factor that we don't hear a lot about is the role of China. What more can you tell us about that?
So this is quite an interesting phenomenon, and something similar is happening with coffee. So a few years ago, in around 2019, China invested in some cocoa bean processing factories in West African countries, Ivory Coast and Ghana. So something like 70% of the world's cocoa supply comes from the one country, Ivory Coast. So this is a big deal. And now those countries welcomed that investment because for a long time they've just been exporting their raw product, meaning they don't see a huge amount of money from the overall value of their natural resource. So this meant that they can make a bit more money out of their cocoa beans. But in return, part of the deal was that China would get 40% of the supply of the cocoa beans from those factories. So Chinese consumer demand for chocolate's been steadily growing since the 90s. There are, as we all know, a lot of people in China. There's a growing middle class there. They increasingly have a taste for chocolate and the money to spend on it. So China was trying to secure up their supply for their people, for their chocolate. And any cocoa beans that go to China directly are taken off the commodities market for the rest of the world. So this is starting to have an impact as well as those other factors I mentioned earlier.
You did mention coffee at the top. This is something that I also am deeply passionate about and do not like seeing the price of my coffee beans being up and on the rise. Can you tell me a little bit more about the coffee situation and what you know about the coffee situation?
So basically, it's just that the same strategy that China's using for the cocoa bean supply, they're doing the same thing with coffee beans. So they're going to the countries that grow the raw product and they are saying, hey, here's a couple $100 million that we'll build a factory with on your soil so that you can see more of the value of your natural resource. In return, we get guaranteed a certain amount of the supply. So it's just the same phenomenon playing out where all of those coffee beans that would otherwise have gone onto the global market are going directly to China. So it means there's a little bit less on the global market, which probably will push the price up a bit more.
Do you think this is something that Australia should be investing in? The government should be investing in these countries to secure our future supply of chocolate and coffee?
Absolutely. We should have an Australia-dedicated coffee bean supply in the best places in the world because I cannot live without it.
For the better part of the last decade, we've been warned that the world could run out of cocoa beans for some of the reasons that you've already mentioned. Some predictions saying that could happen as soon as 2040. Do you think this is the beginning of that?
Gee, I hope not. It does look like this shortage isn't going to resolve itself anytime soon. And, you know, with for example, the aging trees that I mentioned earlier, at some point somebody's going to have to dig those ones up and plant new ones, and it takes time for a tree to grow.
Should I be bracing for some of my favourite chocky to just start disappearing from supermarket shelves? And should I start stockpiling like it's COVID times and there is a toilet paper shortage?
One of the things that some of the chocolate companies are trying to do is basically put less cocoa content into their products. So they're just a little bit less chocolatey and a little bit more milky and sugary. But if you're someone who loves that sort of 90% cocoa content chocolate, I think that is going to become pricier and pricier.
Wow. Well, look, I'll take us out of, the very selfish questions I've been asking about how much I can be expecting to keep paying this much for chocolate, and I'll go elsewhere. In what other ways are we seeing the impacts of this shortage being felt? I mean, I'm thinking about the cocoa farmers and ethical sourcing efforts. Have we seen any movements and changes in these spaces?
These are pretty insecure workers in those countries. So where a bad weather event has wiped out a farm, for example, they will be having to turn to other sources of income. And, one of the factors, I don't think I mentioned it just earlier, was there's some illegal mining happening in Ghana in particular, where basically people sort of just go and dig up the ground near rivers trying to find little bits of gold. And that is also causing some destruction on the cocoa farms. So some of the labour may be being deferred to those sorts of activities. But yeah, I mean, we really should feel for those workers because that's a hard life and it's getting harder.
Is there any work going on that you know of to improve this situation? Essentially, is hope on the horizon?
Well, I think people are sort of starting to realise that they need to put some investment into these places where the cocoa is grown. So hopefully some companies will start to, put some money into the infrastructure, maybe look at what China's doing and try and do something similar so that these countries that grow the raw product can see a bit more return for their investment. And it also just helps to secure the supply and make it more reliable for the rest of the world.
Well, if we do manage in some shape, way or form to shore up supplies, do you think we'll see the prices come back to those pre-shortage levels?
So making price predictions like that is way out of my wheelhouse, but I did check up to see what the experts are saying, and I am very sorry to report that most analysts think that these prices are just going to continue to rise. So even if these issues are resolved, it doesn't look like we're going to see the price come down anytime soon.
Kirsten, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thanks for having me.
That was independent journo and host of the Internet Reviewed on YouTube, Kirsten Drysdale, speaking with me there. And before you go, make sure you leave us a comment on Spotify letting us know how much you've been paying for a block of chocolate in the past year, whether you've noticed these prices creeping up. We'd love to hear from you. Alternatively, head on over to our Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and get in touch. That is it for this episode of The Briefing. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Chris Spyrou. I'll catch you next time.
Listener.